Hello, I'm Doug Benedict, and welcome to the Butler Esports interview series, where we're interviewing sports leaders, owners, and industry experts on the evolving world of esports. Today's interview is with Aakash Ranavat, the Vice President of Central Operations at PlayVS. Aakash is a graduate of Emory University, where he studied finance and accounting. He also received his MBA from UC Berkeley. Akash's experience in esports ranges from a variety of different organizations, including Activision and EA Sports. Thank you for joining us today, Akash.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Doug.
Awesome. So, how did you get started professionally? How did you just jump right into it?
Yeah, I started pretty traditionally back in the day. So as you mentioned, I graduated from Emory with a degree in finance. Went from there right into the investment banking world. I was there sort of pre-financial crisis of 2008, and then during the financial crisis of 2008. So some pretty interesting times throughout. But yeah, started very traditionally with sort of an investment banking and private equity foundation.
So then, how did you end up in play versus in the world of esports?
Yeah. So, when I was in private equity, we were actually making investments into gaming companies at the time. At that time, this was sort of around 2011, there wasn't a ton of investments in the gaming space. Esports was, still not a thing back then, but mobile and social was just emerging as a way for consumption on the gaming side. And so we did a lot of investments on the mobile and social side for gaming companies. And that sort of sparked my interest as, hey, gaming is a very interesting business from a monetization perspective, in the sense of you're sort of moving away from having to purchase a game for $60 at a retail store, and you're thinking about more sort of free-to-play business models on the mobile and social side. And so that really sparked my interest, and that led me to Activision Blizzard, where I worked for a couple of years. And so there I started just in their strategy group, working through really like, hey, where did we want to be as a company in 3 to 5 years? And then I worked on launching new titles. And so, at Activision Blizzard, they don't do this too often, in the sense that they sort of launch a title every 10 years. It tends to be the biggest title every year. But they were launching at that time a title called Destiny. And so I was sort of on the founding team, leadership team for Destiny, saw it through launch, and then also then sort of transitioned into the world of Call of Duty Online, which was sort of a free-to-play game released in China that was obviously Call of Duty, but sort of specifically tailored for the Chinese market. Uh, from there, I went to Electronic Arts, as you mentioned. Similar sort of experiences. At EA was more around creating community and content around the gameplay experience. And then I kind of did a stint outside of gaming at Intuit. And then was just sort of craving getting back in the gaming space, sort of building something from scratch. And PlayVS was doing some amazing things. I think esports is sort of the next big thing as far as just the amount of growth that you can see in the industry. And so just connected with the PlayVS folks, connected with Delane, and jumped on board about 7-8 months ago.
Yeah. So, what's the mission? What's of play versus what do you all do? What do you strive to do?
Yeah, so we're an esports competition platform. We're right now focused on the scholastic market, so both high school and college. And when we say sort of, competition platform, it's really a robust platform which allows schools to, build and manage teams, maintain schedules, track stats, compete in sort of leagues, and then also compete for state championships for our varsity titles. And so just to, some context there is, which we've got two leagues. We've got sort of varsity, which, as I mentioned, is for a state championship. And then we have rec, which is our other product. It just allows sort of any high school across the country to compete. You're not playing for a state championship, but you're essentially playing for a championship, like a play versus championship. And then for college, we have one nationwide league. Club and varsity at times are sort of competing against each other. And we've got a number of titles. So we've got League of Legends, we've got Rocket League, Fortnite, Smite, and then we're going to make some announcements over the next couple weeks and couple months on new titles that we're adding as well to the portfolio.
Awesome. So then your role, I guess, as we just move along this continuum, right? Central operations. What do you do within that platform, I suppose?
Yeah. So central operations is a group that, of course, sits centrally. It's obvious by sort of the name, but really oversees a number of functional groups. And so within central operations, there's high school programs, which is obviously our biggest business unit, where we got started 4 seasons ago. Our entire college business sits under central operations. And then all of external partnerships. And so we've got 2 types of partnerships. We've got the state and NFHS partnerships on our high school side. And then we also have our publishing partnerships as well.
And so you just manage those partnerships, I suppose?
Yeah, so it's really about sort of new partnerships. We're sort of expanding the scale of those partnerships. And then it's really sort of, just working with all our existing partners to figure out how we can grow esports together, right? And then there's an element of like, hey, what else could we be doing that sort of hasn't been done before, right? So just thinking about sort of new growth opportunities altogether that are maybe more longer term, but sort of, getting great minds together to sort of think about those things now helps us accelerate it and unlock it quicker than we would have thought.
Absolutely. So, the big question, the big thing everyone's talking about, right? COVID-19.
Yeah.
How has it kind of affected what you do, and I guess what PlayVS does as a whole?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting times right now, and so a couple things. I'll just sort of talk about the work from home element first, which is it's definitely been interesting because I think PlayVS, we just have such a strong sense of collaboration in sort of every project that we take on, and then we also just generally enjoy being around one another. And so I think, being in the office in that sort of fast-paced environment as a startup with sort of, less than 50 employees, and then sort of having to make the transition to sort of work from home was a bit of an adjustment. I think, now we're sort of in it for a couple months, and so we're getting settled. But I think you always sort of miss that culture and that element of sort of just being around people solving big problems, right? It's a little bit different doing it virtually, obviously. So I think the adjustment will continue, but hopefully this goes away soon. And then as far as competition, for our spring season last year, sort of during the middle of the season, we actually provided schools the opportunity to compete from home. And so, we really invested on the product side, on the league operations side, on the customer support side to make that transition seamless from you participating at your school to you participating at home or virtually. And so, given those learnings, we're obviously going to continue play for home in the fall. But I think those learnings, that investment in spring, it should be pretty seamless for us to provide that opportunity for both high schools and colleges in the fall.
Yeah, that's great. Forward thinking, I suppose. Whether you knew it or not.
Yeah, and we definitely didn't. It was,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was. We were able to at least, and I think it was great because I think there was just a lot of disruption to both the academics and the extracurriculars at that time, right? If you're just sort of sent home and usually without much notice. And so just being able to be a part of providing that community, allowing people to at least have the extracurriculars that they sort of enjoyed pre-COVID and continue that experience, I think was really rewarding for us.
On a personal note, you jumped from a traditional realm to a non-traditional realm, I guess if you want to call it that, jumping into esports. Was there any advice that you were given by anybody when you made that jump? Was it esports specific, or was it just like, hey, this is a new industry, here's what you should know?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, I think there's just some nuances with esports as a whole, but I think the advice was just to be comfortable with ambiguity. I think it seems sort of vague in general, but in the sense of, you don't know what you don't know, and I think you have to be comfortable with that. I think in a space that's sort of rapidly evolving, and then especially on Scholastic, right, which didn't really have a foundational infrastructure before PlayVS. And then really just being creative, and really just striving to provide really rewarding experiences for players, coaches, schools, and our partners, whether it's state partners, whether it's the NFHS, or whether it's publishing partners. I think um, it, you know, it's definitely interesting when you think about just how much the industry has evolved. For us to sort of keep pace with it, sort of put a new market together, but then also to impact sort of the lives of players, coaches. It's just, you kind of have to be comfortable just flexing every day to be able to sort of accomplish that goal.
Absolutely. So, back to play versus, if you're a school like, say, maybe not like Butler, but a school like the size of Butler, or a high school, or a school much bigger, like what does the onboard look like for us? Is it different too? Is it different between like colleges and high schools?
It it isn't very different in the sense of a couple of things, right? So one, we have sort of a seamless onboarding flow where you can just essentially sign up. The thing that makes us different, obviously, and this was a choice we made when we sort of first started, was you have to have a coach on the high school side. And I'll talk about college in a second. But on the high school side, you have to have a coach. And so either a player could sign up or a coach could sign up. If a player signs up, they have to go and sort of find a coach. And you can actually do that through the platform as well, which is you can request a coach to join. But then essentially a coach joins, we verify them that they're actually from that school. They either are staff or faculty at that school. The coach then verifies the players. That's a way for us as an added verification to know that those players actually are at that school. And then it's really just about sort of setting up your team, setting up your roster, and enrolling into the season. It's as easy as that. And so it's pretty seamless. We've put a lot of work into that. And then on the college side, the only difference is that, given there's a lot of sort of very competitive clubs that might not have sort of faculty representation or staff representation, a student staff member of that club, so let's say the gaming president or the captain of that club, could sign up as a coach. So more of like the player coach option on the college side. But that's essentially how onboarding works for us.
So what do you think you all, not that I'm asking you to, rag on everybody else in the industry, right? But what do you think you all have gotten right about, your competition and your platform and, all of that? Like, how do you think, you stand out, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything we do is just from a player experience first motto. I mean, we truly believe that in everything we think about. We'll put player experience first in front of business, just to make sure that they're having the best experience that they could be having. And this includes in competition and outside of competition, because we think they're equally valuable from a community perspective. I think the other thing is just we've got a best in class product, right? I mean, if you want to play in structured leagues competitively with the best community, it's Play Versus. It's an entire turnkey solution. And so we're able to sort of offer and tailor our product depending on how the industry evolves. And we're able to do that quite rapidly and quickly, efficiently as well. Just the number of titles available that students want to play is, I think, another thing, right? Which is we've got titles, as I mentioned before, we're adding new titles, but really creating a portfolio sort of that any student that's interested could play on Play Versus. This is a huge competitive advantage for us, which is, we're the exclusive or official partner to many publishers. Official Scholastic partner. And so, we don't do community or tournament licenses. We sign long-term exclusive or official partnerships with publishers. We have the varsity and the rec leagues. And I think that's important because varsity is obviously the most competitive team, the one team at your school. But we also have rec, which is, if you've got other teams that want to play titles, you can do so. And I think that's great because, those players might one day compete on the varsity team as well, right? Sort of a proxy to traditional athletics. And then I think it's our partnership just with state associations, the NFHS, as well, to be able to sort of offer state championships in different states. I think, their support on that side is great. And then just the lower cost per student, right? So if you think about traditional sports, if you look at sort of basketball, for instance, $1,200 or so, let's say you have got a program size of 25, that's the per player cost. If you look at Play Versus, it's $80. And so we strive to be the most accessible, inclusive sport that you could participate in for essentially, players and coaches across the country.
Absolutely. So all that said, and you may have alluded to this already, what are your measures of success? Like, how do you decide what has been successful, what is successful, what's going to be?
Yeah, I think for us, I think it goes back to just player experience first. I think our measure of success is just what the players, coaches, and community think about what we're providing. And that's sort of our benchmark for success. I mean, we'll actively reach out for feedback. We've built such a tight community that sort of coaches and players feel comfortable providing feedback to us. And so, from our standpoint, it's also the sort of the anchor that runs our business, because we'll collect feedback, we'll sort of act on that feedback, and then essentially test with the community whether this is something that they sort of envisioned or wanted, or how the experience is turning out to be. And so, for us, it's really just our success is player experience first, and then. Our other success is just from an accessibility, inclusion, being able to sort of reach every high school and college in the country, and then provide them sort of an esports offering as a way to build, community, a sense of belonging, teamwork. There's benefits of sort of esports and STEM, and so really being able to sort of further that mission at every school across the country.
Yeah. And so, maybe this plays on your background a little bit, and you've kind of alluded to this. I don't know where it fits in, so that's why I'm asking you the question is, so venture capital, right?
Yep.
And your operations, how do they come together, to get to the vision of what you want the organization to be?
Do you mean there, like how our investors play a part in it, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we obviously have a handful of investors. We've raised about $96 million just over the last 2 years, and so we're backed by sort of the best investors out there. And so just from a guidance perspective, running things by them to get their sort of advice and feedback. And then just sort of, opportunities in the space, right? These folks are obviously well connected, have been around for a while in the, broader entertainment and gaming area. And so really just working with them from a guidance advice perspective, our investors are just absolutely great, always available. And so it makes it easy for us to sort of just work in partnership with them across sort of the strategies we're building.
So your continued growth within esports, right? Does that look like just getting more schools, more academic units within the organization? I mean, I know you mentioned more titles. Like, what does that plan look like, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it's always sort of building a portfolio of games, and I think rather than just more titles, I think it's getting the right titles. These have to be sort of titles that are obviously popular, that have the right competitive elements, can be played in a team-based format, right? Because that's sort of the mission of esports, and so yeah, just getting the right titles and more of them. Really building a community as well, right? So beyond our sort of element of competition, really just building more of a community offering and continuing to expand on that. And then I think you sort of you mentioned it, which is really providing the opportunity to sort of every school across the country, right? I think there's some education, some outreach, just to get sort of schools on board. But we're sort of committed to doing so for every school.
Absolutely. And is there, I don't want to say extra offering, right? But do you provide anything in the way to the schools who are involved of like curriculum or academic programming, stuff like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we do a couple things that are, I think, pretty unique, right? So we do like coach and player spotlights, which is sort of similar to this, which is really about understanding player stories, coaches stories, which are really interesting. Either how they got into competitive gaming at the collegiate level, or how they ended up being sort of a head coach of esports. We do leaderboards, power rankings, things to sort of keep the community connected on the competition side. We did something called Fireside Chats last season.
Yeah.
So this was our effort to really work with coaches and players to connect them with sort of industry experts in the field. And a lot of this was sort of a career exploration, right? Which is, students came to us and they said, hey, look, I don't know what's available in esports. Like, do I have to kind of be on this path or this path? And the point was that, there's really no path or no major that's really going to prevent you from joining the esports world, right? I mean, I think there's opportunities for everybody. If you studied accounting in college, there's opportunities in esports to work at publishers, to at PlayVS, we've got an entire finance team, and so just really connecting them with industry experts, hearing their stories was I think really impactful. And then we do broadcasts as well, right? So we do broadcasts for playoffs and championships. These are really high production events that we do, really to not only draw engagement, but to also bring that element of community around the competition as well.
Absolutely. Sounds awesome. So when you look at a school like us, like Butler, right, or schools similar to us, how do you, from your standpoint, think that like we can grow in this, in this area and grow our brand, grow our outreach, grow our name, grow our support to other schools or other organizations or high schools, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have just done a phenomenal job. So I think the Butler brand in esports is already strong, right? In a lot of ways, you guys are sort of forward thinking, leading the thinking there. Just think about sort of like these initiatives that you're putting on, right? Interviewing folks in the industry, I think is super helpful. And so just tremendous job that you guys have done. And then maybe a couple other areas that I know sort of Butler has been sort of leading the charge on, but could be interesting to sort of further expand, which is building esports at the conference level, right? So at the Big East, really building sort of that same um, uh, sort of esports program across all universities or member institutions at the conference level, and then really just providing or really partnering with community organizations in the local area. Um, I think is not only for sort of like a pipeline of talent across sort of initiatives that you guys are pursuing, um, but I think as you think about sort of just the connection to the greater state or the greater city, really making sort of esports more visible is something else that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the $1 million question, right? In 3 to 5 years, where do you see the esports industry? Where do you think we're gonna be? What do you think it's gonna look like?
Yeah. So, yeah, I've got a couple thoughts here. I think, 3 to 5 years with just how fast this industry is moving is I think there will be a lot that will be accomplished. But, you know, I think, um, I think if you think about just where it's going to be as far as traditional sports, I think uh, you're going to be also right now, just from a viewership perspective. I mean, it's exceeding some of the big traditional sports events. I think that will continue. I think that will continue to grow. I think virtual engagement is going to be sort of a model that traditional sports is going to sort of look for learnings on as well. And then I think it's just going to be the you're going to see sort of program sizes in schools growing, just the way that you did with sort of football and basketball over time. Um, we've grown a lot faster than those sports, given that we've just started over the last couple of years, but um, definitely see that growing. I see sort of esports, maybe being an Olympic sport or being more of a uh, how would you describe it? But a sport, I would say, at the same level as sort of those that receive recognition at that level as well. And so that's sort of just some thoughts about where it's going to go. But I think it's going to move really quickly. I also think that there'll be, as you think about it, right, you'll see a number of more titles that are sort of popular from an esports perspective, and I think they will be cross-platform as well. So PC, console, even mobile, emerging in that space as well. So yeah, a lot of thoughts here, but yeah, just a couple.
No, that's great. So last question that we ask everybody who bring on here to throw your friends under the bus, I suppose, is do you have two other people, suggestions of people we should interview and give us extremely interesting perspectives like you have given us, whether it be somewhere new in the field or somewhere unique in the field, something like that?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if I have people specifically because I think there's a number to choose from, but I can give you sort of two areas that I think would be really interesting. I think one would be at the publishers. Um, so whether it's Riot, whether it's Epic, whether it's EA, Take Two, Nintendo. I mean, I think there's a number of publishers, Psyonix. Uh, I think many of them have sort of scholastic teams or sort of esports amateur teams in house. And so getting their perspective, I think, would be really great. And then the other areas, I think, someone who's really active with sort of esports, gaming, broader entertainment investments at a venture firm, I think would be really insightful because I think they obviously have a different perspective and sort of 1,000-foot view of what's happening, not only across esports, but across the broader landscape. I think they could be a great addition as well.
Absolutely. Those are great suggestions. Uh, well, that's a wrap for this interview session. Akash, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Stay safe, stay well. Go dogs.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Doug. I really appreciate you bringing me on, and yeah, definitely stay safe. And we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.